South Africa's formal bilateral and trading relationship with the United States has been in the spotlight, let's say, for the first 7 months of this year. Indeed, the first 7 months of President Donald Trump's second administration. The focus on this relationship and the various tenets and parts thereof was not just in the recent past, in the sense of maybe decline, maybe in the sense of crisis. These developments have been coming for quite a long time in previous administrations as well. It is not only under current President Donald Trump that the South African-US relationship is taking strain. Now, one gets feedback sometimes from official government sources, sometimes not. Part of trying to fulfill that void of a state and a government that is under various pressure points, but also has various internal issues to try and navigate from interest group point of view, from ideological considerations, from, of course, the main party, that being the ANC in the GNU. Those challenges mean that one doesn't always get the information that one needs to make an informed decision. That is where we see different role players in South African society, political parties, civil society organizations, think tanks, going to Washington and trying to figure out exactly where things stand. And what can South Africa do from a formal diplomatic point of view? What can South African civil society do? What can businesses in South Africa do to try and improve the relationship and meet the Trump administration where they are? It doesn't help to complain and wail about this current administration. This is the reality. And if South Africa wants to pursue its interests, this is how it should try to engage. So with that quite long intro to just set some of the context, I'm joined today by Dr. Corné Mulder, the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, one of the major political parties in South Africa, and of course, a partner in the government of national unity. Dr. Mulder, thank you very much for your time here on the CRA YouTube channel. Your first time, hopefully the first time of many that we have you on. Dr. Mulder, yourself, Gerard Papenfuss of NIASA, and Theo de Jager, the chairperson of the agricultural organization SAI, the three of you recently went to Washington, D.C., and I'm guessing other parts in the U.S. as well, as a sort of delegation, a quote-unquote Afrikaner delegation. That is what the label has been in the media, as it were, maybe an easy catch-all phrase. Also, in a way, I think, trying to undermine some of your initiatives. But we'll get into that. So could you give us some background on the trip? You went in your capacity as Freedom Front leader, but I don't think in any sense try to speak on behalf of the GNU, as it were. But I think trying to put forward South African interests and, of course, Afrikaner interests. Can you tell us a little bit about how the trip came about and maybe get, if I can focus first on the sort of elephant in the room, who did you get to meet with in the White House and in Washington?
Yes. No, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a privilege to participate. Your analysis is absolutely correct, where we came from and how we got to the point where we are at the moment. And I think a large part of that unhappiness in the relationship between the United States and South Africa came from the fact that the ANC for almost more than 30 years governed all by themselves. And in that time, they did take certain decisions that were not very favorable to the United States. The last 7 months or so, the emphasis has grown. And we all remember that it started off in February when President Trump basically issued that executive order. That was followed by the removal of the South African ambassador, Abraham Rasool. Then we saw a number of delegations that went to the United States in Washington. There was a delegation from the Democratic Alliance, one from the Solidarity Movement, one from Orania. There was a delegation by President Trump himself. There was a business delegation. Our situation is a little bit different. We did not decide to go to Washington and put a case. We were invited to go there, and the delegation was put together by those who invited us. So they decided they would like to hear what I've got to say from a political point of view, as well as Theo de Jager from the agricultural and Gerard Papenfuss from the business side. So that was how it came about. We went there and we had a very hectic program. It was a very intensive program. And as I've explained, if you look at the situation in Washington with regard to governance, you've got the White House that basically where you'll find the executive, and then on the Hill, the legislative branch consisting of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and you also have the State Department. Now, with regard to all of these components, each one of them has got their own Africa-focused institution internally, and we were able to meet with senior people in each of these institutions on a very high level, dealing with Africa and South Africa. We also had discussions with some agricultural unions that represent all the farmers in the United States, as well as business people, as well as with 3 of the policy institutes. So it was a very comprehensive program. We were busy morning, noon, and night, if I may put it that way, but it was very constructive. With regard to the meeting in the White House, which I think was the most important because the executive takes the lead in these things with regard to foreign policy, international relations between the United States and South Africa, to a very large extent, is being set by the administration in charge, and this time it's the Trump administration. So we met with some senior officials, representatives from the Office of the Vice President, as well as from the Homeland Security Council, the National Security Council, as well as the people in charge of the refugee program and some others. As a matter of fact, when President Ramaphosa came about a month or so ago, before he left for the United States, I was interviewed and I said, I think it's a mistake. I think it's going to be a diplomatic catastrophe for the simple reason. The relationship is so strained between the two countries that you cannot start on the level of heads of state. You should start on a different level and see if you can iron out the differences. And if you can come to an agreement, then the heads of state get involved. They go and sign the agreement in public. But it was decided to do it the other way around, and I think that was a big mistake.
Dr. Mulder, specifically on that point of the Ramaphosa-Trump meeting, I think there was an element of a sense of relief in South Africa, in the media and in other quarters, that perhaps the meeting had gone better than had been imagined the worst case scenario. So you had the playing of the video of Julius Malema singing the Kill the Boer chant. You had other clips that you could see visibly make President Ramaphosa squirm. In some elements, one wanted him to have more training in terms of not maybe presenting a bit of a poker face and not showing exactly how uncomfortable he was. But that sense of relief, I think, has given South Africa a bit of lulled it into a false sense of security and thinking, okay, yes, worst case scenario averted, things are fine now. What was your sense on the ground in Washington? Do you think that is the case?
Absolutely correct. Two things. Some people said that the meeting in the Oval Office was an ambush. I don't agree with that. It was not an ambush. If the government did its homework, it could not be an ambush. The video could have been played. Our president could have sat back and relaxed, and when it was completed, could have said to President Trump, let me just tell you what we've done. On this and this date, we have declared farm murders and rural attacks as priority crimes. On this and this date, we have acted against the instigators and the people who use kill the Boer, kill the farmer. On this and this date, I attended Nampo and I laid a wreath for the people that have been murdered. We've taken this and this. None of those things were done. And because of that, it was a very uncomfortable situation. Secondly, I can share with you that now, after we've been there, I am aware of the fact that we only saw Act 1. There was an Act 2 planned in that situation that were never put into action. And the reason for the fact that Act 2 was not put into play, I believe, was because that the South African delegation did not enter into an argument with President Trump. They didn't got argumentative like what happened in the Zelensky situation. And also because of some of the good interventions that were made by the other people that went along. Ernie Els, Johan Rupert specifically, Retief Goosen, etc. And I think that turned the atmosphere and turned the tide. But the problem was when President Ramaphosa returned to South Africa, he said it was a huge success and the relationship is now being reset, etc., and they will now take it further with regard to trade negotiations. We did not meet anyone in Washington that agreed with that assessment. Each and every one that we met said that from their perspective, it was a catastrophe and a diplomatic problem. And since then, the question is, what has South Africa done to reset those kind of relations? We all know that President Ramaphosa hoped to speak to President Trump at the G7 in Canada. That did not materialize. So technically, nothing has happened since then. I know that there has been some interaction between our Trade Department and the United States and to see if they can find some kind of agreement and common ground.
And we believe we achieved that because there was engagement after the Oval Office interaction with the media and the public.
But in the end, the policy and the International Relations Directive is being set by the executive administration. That's the Trump administration. And that's why it was interesting when they gave us certain demands from their perspective.
Dr. Mulder, from the South African point of view, I think there's a desire for for a trade agreement, for example, to just be discussed as a quote unquote trade agreement. So there's not wanting maybe to even in some way entertain that there could be other things that go into this relationship and trade question. Where for the Trump administration, I think, if one hasn't already accepted this fact, but they do things quite differently. So when it comes to trade, they might then include other things, trade and investment. They might then talk about other more substantive foreign policy things that form part of that calculation, that relationship between themselves and other countries. We now have, as we record on the 7th of July, either this week or some point in July, there will be the U.S. reciprocal tariffs reimposed on U.S. trading partners. South Africa earlier this year was faced 31%, could be higher, could be lower. Just this morning, again on the 7th of July, President Trump posted on his Truth Social account, countries that move towards BRICS and BRICS priorities face another 10% reciprocal tariff. So then we get into the 50%, 60% territory for South Africa. But all in all, what was the main, I guess, learning or the main takeaway as to those trade or other priorities that the Trump administration is putting forward, that things that might not fall in sort of traditional, trade and investment scope that they want South Africa to deal with?
Well, first of all, in each and every meeting that we had, be that with politicians, be that with officials, be that with business people or the think tanks, everyone that we spoke to wants to have normal trade with South Africa. And they are excited about the opportunities that South Africa could give and the huge market that we can get access to if we can normalize things. That was across the board. Everybody wanted that. But from the administration's point of view, there are certain things that what they call non-trade barriers, in terms of limitations that is not in terms of other kind of political things that causes a problem and that needs to be addressed. And it was interesting, in our meeting in the White House, we put the case for South Africa, and let me be quite clear, we did not go there to complain, we did not go there to gossip, we did not go there to slander or to throw our country under the bus. No, on the contrary. We went there as a delegation that said, we want to bring a case to the United States. Can we normalize the relationship between the two countries, firstly? And secondly, how can we get to a position where we can get economic growth in South Africa as well as job creation that will create a successful country, a winning nation for all, which from our perspective would also include the Afrikaner and the rights of other minorities as well, and we can get that kind of solution. So in that discussion, and we put that case in the White House meeting, for example, they then came back and they said, okay, thank you very much. We heard what you said, but we now inform you what we say. And then they clearly stipulated those 4 things that they identified, and they said these are preconditions that need to be met before we can normalize relations between the United States and South Africa. And that was very interesting. Some people reacted afterwards and said, but that can't be true. You are lying. You put on your little suit and you stood there on the pavement and took a picture and created the impression that you spoke to people in the White House. No, it's not a gimmick. This is the reality. So they explained to us these 4 things, and they made the point to say, we have conveyed these things already to the South African government. It seems that they are not listening. They don't want to hear us. They conveyed this to the embassy. They don't want to listen. Please go you now and tell the South African public and the government that these are our preconditions. So that was quite interesting.
Dr. Mulder, just to reiterate those 4 conditions, could you just go through each of them?
It was interesting. Well, the first one was with regard to rural safety, that there's an insistence that with regard to rural safety, the murders of farmers and their workers, black and white, that should become a priority crimes, and that they should be investigated each and every situation by a specialized unit like the Hawks. That was the first one. The second one was, they said they expect the ANC to denounce the kill the Boer, kill the farmers chant, and that it cannot be used. And I specifically then asked, who do you expect to distance themselves from this? Is that the government of national unity or who? They said, no, we expect the ANC to do so. It's their song, it's their slant that comes from their struggle. We expect them to do so. And then we went to the economics. So the third one was basically that they said there can be no expropriation without compensation of property, without fair and market-related compensation, after all the necessary legal processes have been followed. And then the last one was with regard to what they call the race-based legislation in South Africa, black economic empowerment, etc., that American companies and entities should be exempted from that. And they were very clear. They had that written out. These are our preconditions. We then left, and in the evening when we drew up a statement to make this known to South Africa, we did not want to say things that are not technically correct and that we have misunderstood. So after we finished our statement, we contacted the White House and said, this is what we're going to communicate. Are we representing your views correctly? And they came back, they made 1 or 2 small changes, and then it was agreed and we could send it off. So these things are the position of the Trump administration at the moment.
Dr. Mulder, maybe to ask you a bit about the sort of role that you have to wear, you know, the few hats that you have to wear as leader of the Freedom Front Plus, as one of the parties in the GNU, and then also as part of this delegation. Were there questions in Washington around the GNU itself, whether it's working or not, what role there is for parties like the Freedom Front Plus, which is, you know, has the opportunity to be a national government, but on the other hand, you know, one doesn't want to be co-opted, as it were?
Absolutely. No, the government of national unity was discussed. And I can assure you, also across the board, people are strongly supportive of the government of national unity. They want it to succeed. They think it's the right way to do it. They think it's a winning situation. And they believe that if the right policies are followed, the government of national unity could be the instrument that brings the necessary changes in South Africa with regard to economic growth, prosperity, security, and all the positive things. But there are concerns. They were seriously concerned about certain things within the government of national unity. My point of view was that the problem is there are 2 absolute essential terrains that creates a problem. The one is international relations, and that is because the ANC has decided that international relations remains their exclusive domain. That is unacceptable. It can never be the case. How can one component of a government decide that they've got the sole right with regard to pronunciation in terms of international relations? And the second one is economic policy. That's why on the 27th of May, I asked the President in Parliament, what new policies are you developing with regard to economics so that we can get economic growth? The President then doubled down and said, no. These current policies in terms of affirmative action, equity, black economic empowerment are going to be stepped up, never mind amend or change with new policies. And that creates a serious problem because the facts indicate something is wrong. You can't have the same policies for 15 years. You can't get above 1% growth with huge unemployment and still say, but these policies just needs to be implemented even more so. And those 2 things are a concern within the United States as well.
Dr. Mulder, we've seen President Ramaphosa act not as swiftly as one might say, but he acted relatively swiftly on the former Deputy Minister of Trade, Andrew Whitfield, and his trip as a Democratic Alliance representative to Washington. For you, again, with sort of Freedom Front hat on, your colleague Peter Groenewald, the Minister of Correctional Services, have you been wrapped over the knuckles as yet for undertaking this trip?
No, definitely not, and that's the difference. The President could act against the Deputy Minister from the Democratic Alliance because in terms of his position in the executive, he needs permission before he can travel. I am, as leader of our party, not part of the executive. I don't need the approval of the President. I do need the approval of my own party and my own party structures, and I made sure that I got that. They wanted me to go. So I did not need to ask for any permission, and it's correct. We are part of the government of national unity. Dr. Groenewald is part of the executive. The fact that I went from my party's perspective as a member outside the government, outside the executive, cannot be a reason to act against the Minister of Correctional Services. He's been doing his job and he's going on a daily basis with his job, and there's no reason. If the President acts against him or the party because of my visit, it will also send a very strong message to the United States of what is happening in South Africa.
And Dr. Mulder, maybe a last question. I know there's so much for us to cover in these discussions, but we really want to cut through and cut to the most important point. So maybe just a last question or sort of opportunity for you to leave us with some parting thoughts. We had the Minister of International Relations, Minister Lamola. He recently told Parliament that while there was nothing wrong with the Freedom Front trip, referring to the Freedom Front and the other entities in this delegation, those who travel abroad, quote, sometimes misrepresent themselves as being part of the GNU. It becomes problematic when they travel there and distort our policy, end quote. If I could ask you, if you had to write South Africa's foreign policy, not only towards the US, but globally, South Africa's geopolitical position. From your point of view as the Freedom Front, as part of this delegation, what do you think is in South Africa's economic and investment interest in terms of things like job creation, quality of life, that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. I think the exact problem is that the international relations and international relations policy has been set by the ANC for 30 years, and they continue to do so. I honestly believe the fact that President Trump took out his magnifying glass in the beginning of this year and has put South Africa under this pressure is exactly because of our international relations policy and because of the steps South Africa took with regard to Israel. And by taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, I think that set the whole process in motion. What is in the best interest of South Africa? The best interest of South Africa would be that we are really non-aligned, that we are really neutral, that we act what's in the best interest of South Africa. And I think India is an excellent example. India is a more senior player than us in the BRICS agreement. But when President Trump came to power and was back in office, the Prime Minister of India was almost one of the first to visit the Oval Office and to sign a very comprehensive agreement for the benefit of the people in India. It doesn't mean that we cannot trade with other countries. That's not expected from the United States, that we cannot trade with China or Russia or whatever the case may be. Yes, they do expect us not to be in cahoots with some rogue states or some terrorist states like Iran or Venezuela or some of these rogue states. But South Africa says that we are neutral and non-aligned, but the opposite is absolutely quite clear, and that creates a problem. Part of what we also did was when we went to the States, we basically made the point to say that South Africa should have put on the table a trade deal, and the deal should have been twofold. The one should deal with trade itself, and we gave certain examples of what can be done. But the second one was a whole question with regard to geopolitical reality, and we said basically that we should negotiate with the United States an agreement between Argentina, South Africa, and the United States, because these three countries have the key to the entrance into the South Atlantic, around the Cape Horn, around the Cape of Good Hope, and the control of the Panama Canal. And this is very important to the United States in terms of their soft underbelly coming through the South Atlantic. And it's quite clear what the United States does not want to see is control of Simonstown naval base by the Chinese. And the United States is very much aware of the fact that the Chinese are moving away from a coastal navy to a deep blue water navy, and they are looking at these realities. South Africa should act in the final analysis what's in the best interest of the people of South Africa, and that means we have to be non-aligned and get the benefits from either way where we can get them. We do not have to choose sides. We can act in our own best interest.
Dr. Mulder, I said the previous question was the last one, but I just thought of one more, and I'm throwing a bit of a curveball at you. But anything in the discussion around targeted sanctions on South Africa, on South African individuals, anything like that?
It's an absolute reality. We also met with Congressman Ronnie Jackson's office, and we spoke to Dr. Katie there, Walbach, that drafted that legislation. The legislation with regard to the whole looking into the relationship between the United States and South Africa is on the agenda at the moment, and that legislation makes provision for targeted sanctions against individuals. I believe the point we made was, please do not punish South Africa, do not punish our economy, do not punish our agricultural sector. But it could be that if South Africa continues along the path, and I'm saying South Africa, it's not South Africa, it's the ANC, within the government of national unity, they continue down this path, it may very well lead to that kind of step being taken by the United States. I honestly believe that the preconditions set by the United States and the Trump administration should be taken very seriously. And maybe you've seen that, I don't know. There was an interview with Joshua Mercevi during the weekend. It was an interview done by Linda van Tilburg, and in that interview, he clearly makes it very clear that the information that we brought back is absolutely factually correct, that he's got regular contact with people in the Trump administration, and that these are the conditions, the preconditions for normalization of relations. Let's start to talk about this and address that. If we ignore that, it will be at the peril of those who think it's not necessary.
It's very much one of those sink or swim moments, I think, for South Africa and for the ANC. South Africa has been afforded this attention and opportunity by the White House for the first 7 months of this year. We either use it to our economic advantage or we don't. So yeah, I think on that note we will close. Yes. Yeah. Dr. Mulder, thank you very much for your time, for your work. I'm sure we'll talk again very soon. Everybody else, thank you very much for watching. We'll chat soon.